How does a country just disappear? It's a crazy question, right? But in the 1990s, the nation of Yugoslavia, which was once this beacon of unity in a divided Europe, literally tore itself apart in a brutal decade of war. So today, we're going to break down the Yugoslav Wars, a series of conflicts that completely redrew the map of the Balkans and left scars that, well, are still feeling today.
To really get our heads around how a country can just vanish, we first have to understand what it was in the first place. You see, Yugoslavia wasn't just some name on a map. It was a really bold and, as it turns out, incredibly fragile political experiment.
Okay, so after the total devastation of World War II, a really powerful leader, Marshal Tito, basically forged a new nation from the ashes. He brought together this complex mosaic of South Slavic peoples, you're talking Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, and more, all under one socialist banner. And it was all held together by this powerful motto of brotherhood and unity. And you know what? For decades, it actually seemed to work.
But then, Tito died in 1980. And just like that, the glue holding this incredibly diverse nation together was gone. As you can see on this timeline, economic hardship and the collapse of communism all across Eastern Europe opened up a total Pandora's box of old grievances. The force of ethnic nationalism, which had been suppressed for so long, didn't just return, it absolutely exploded.
So, the first real crack in the Federation showed up in June 1991, when Slovenia, the most prosperous part of the country, declared its independence. The Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA, moved in. But the fight was surprisingly short. See, Slovenia was pretty much ethnically homogeneous, and its defense force was super motivated. After just 10 days, the JNA realized it couldn't win without a much bigger war, so it pulled back. Slovenia was independent. But this was a deceptively calm start to the storm that was coming.
But the story in neighboring Croatia? Completely different. They declared independence on the very same day as Slovenia, but their path was no 10-day affair. No way. It was a brutal 4-year war that set a really terrifying precedent for the violence that would soon engulf the entire region.
The conflict basically had two main sides, as you can see here. On one side, you had the newly elected Croatian government, led by a nationalist president, Franje Tuđman. They wanted a fully independent state, and even brought back symbols associated with the country's fascist past. On the other side, Croatia's large ethnic Serb minority was terrified they'd be persecuted, and they were heavily supported by Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. So they rebelled. They declared their own little state inside Croatia's borders, and the war was on.
And this wasn't a war that was fought only on some distant front line. It was an assault on the very heart of Croatian culture and life. The city of Vukovar was besieged for 3 months and just reduced to rubble. Meanwhile, the shelling of the ancient UNESCO-protected city of Dubrovnik sent an absolute shockwave through the international community. This was a new, brutal kind of warfare.
The brutality we saw in Croatia was really just a prelude to the most devastating chapter of Yugoslavia's collapse, the Bosnian War. When Bosnia and Herzegovina followed the others and voted for independence, it plunged into a catastrophic conflict that would become infamous for the worst atrocities Europe had seen since World War II. The tragedy of Bosnia, as this chart kind of shows, was its diversity. Unlike the other republics, it didn't have a single ethnic majority. It was a true melting pot where Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats had lived side by side for centuries. But when the country declared independence in 1992, that delicate balance just shattered. Neighbors turned on neighbors in a horrific 3-sided war.
The absolute heart of the Bosnian War was the siege of its capital, Sarajevo. For 1,425 days, that's the longest siege of a capital in modern history, its citizens were trapped in a living hell. From the hills all around the city, Bosnian Serb forces just relentlessly shelled it. Snipers would prey on civilians, men, women, children, just for trying to cross the street to get food or water. It was a daily fight for survival against this invisible, ever-present threat.
This number, it represents the absolute darkest moment of the Bosnian War. In July of 1995, in a town called Srebrenica, a place the United Nations had declared a safe area, if you can believe that, supposedly under the protection of peacekeepers, Bosnian Serb forces systematically murdered over 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys. It was an act of calculated genocide.
The Srebrenica massacre was a turning point. It finally pushed a hesitant international community into a decisive NATO military intervention that forced everyone to the negotiating table. The result was the Dayton Agreement, signed in Ohio of all places, and it stopped the fighting. But it came at a price. The agreement cemented the ethnic divisions the war had created, splitting Bosnia into two separate parts. So yeah, it ended the war, but it left behind a deeply fractured and politically dysfunctional state.
Now, while the guns finally fell silent in Bosnia, the embers of conflict were still glowing somewhere else. The final, violent chapter of Yugoslavia's breakup would happen in Kosovo, a province in southern Serbia with a 90% ethnic Albanian majority, where tensions had been simmering for years.
The path to war in Kosovo followed a grimly familiar pattern. Years of systematic Serbian oppression of the Kosovar Albanian population led to the rise of an armed insurgency, the Kosovar Liberation Army, or KLA. As the KLA attacked Serbian forces, the Serbian response got more and more brutal, finally culminating in the massacre of 45 Kosovar Albanian civilians in a village called Reshaped. That was the final straw. After diplomatic efforts failed, NATO, basically determined to prevent another Bosnia, launched a 78-day bombing campaign against Serbia, forcing its troops to withdraw from Kosovo.
So, with the end of the Kosovo conflict, the wars were finally over, but they left behind a shattered region. The aftermath was just this landscape of physical ruins, millions of refugees, and a moral reckoning for the horrific war crimes that had been committed.
You know, this horrifying term, ethnic cleansing, became synonymous with the Yugoslav Wars. And let's be clear, it wasn't just some side effect of the fighting, it was a deliberate strategy. Unlike a traditional war where you're trying to defeat an army, the goal here was to actually remove a people from the land itself, to create ethnically pure territories by terrorizing, expelling, and killing people just because of who they were.
And then there was the ultimate crime, genocide. The systematic slaughter of the men and boys at Srebrenica was later ruled to be an act of genocide by two international courts, and this was a landmark moment. It was the first time since the Nuremberg trials after World War II that a crime in Europe was legally defined as genocide. It sent a powerful message that acts like this would not go unpunished.
So to bring the perpetrators of these awful crimes to justice, the United Nations set up a special court, the International Criminal Tribunal for the Former Yugoslavia, or ICTY. This was a revolutionary step. For the first time since Nuremberg, high-ranking political and military leaders, guys like Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic and Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic, were put on trial for war crimes. The whole idea that leaders are responsible for what their subordinates do was firmly established.
It's so easy to get lost in all the politics and the military strategy, but the human cost of these wars, as this table just makes painfully clear, was staggering. Over 130,000 people were killed. Nearly 4 million people, that's a number almost equivalent to the entire population of Croatia today, were forced from their homes. It was a human catastrophe on a scale Europe hadn't seen in 50 years.
So today, the guns are silent. The cities have been rebuilt. A whole new generation has grown up only knowing peace. But, and this is the big question, are the divisions truly gone? Deep-seated ethnic distrust, totally conflicting stories of the past, and political instability still plague the region. The wars may be over, but the struggle for a lasting peace, for real reconciliation, that continues. The ghost of Yugoslavia, you could say, still haunts the Balkans.